You know, there has been so much discussion over the past several years, really, about this idea of autonomous driving. I heard on the radio just a few days ago, Clark Howard mentioned that vehicles will soon begin to implement autonomous driving in their models for vehicles, not in 10 years, not in even 5 years, but more like in 2 to 3 years, where vehicles will begin to, on a regular basis, have the capability to autonomously drive themselves. While maybe you need to text or you need to call someone on the phone, and to think about that is very interesting. But the whole idea of autonomous living is really somewhat of an explosion right now in the market. It's not a new phenomenon. Of course, robotics and autonomous things have been explored over the past several decades, but folks have even theorized that maybe one day we'll even have autonomous companies. In other words, no one is even sitting or steering the ship, if you will, but the company is literally just operating and calculating what it ought to be doing just by itself. A machine is running the company. Well, you think about that idea and that concept and really the convenience and maybe the ease that comes with life with autonomy and autonomous capabilities. And now apply that for a second to spirituality and ask yourself, is it possible to live autonomously spiritually in the sense that we would just be on autopilot? We can get to the point where we are on autopilot or just autonomously driving down the road, if you will, spiritually, if we're not careful. In Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, Paul writes the following: I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. See, if we're just autonomously operating and engaged kind of like an automatic car, spiritually speaking, we might not even stop to realize for a moment that we are conforming ourselves to the world, and that we are not setting out to continuously transform instead our minds. James writes in James chapter 1 and in verse 27 that pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the orphans and widows and their affliction, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. Well, if we are living autonomously spiritually and we're just an autopilot, we may not be taking the time to really pay attention as to those to whom we could help. To those to whom we could, in this verse, the word is used, visit. In other words, be hospitable toward. Find and identify those who have a need and see where we can help fulfill that need. This is an area that requires exploration. This is an area that requires examination and reflection. Finally, if we are living autonomously spiritually, we may not be doing our duty within our families. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, Paul writes, And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Notice there the action that is required, the initiative that is required, the objectives that are required. A family unit needs to have direction. And that direction is, as we see here in this verse, being instructed and given to the fathers to be carrying it out and leading the way before the children. But if we're just operating autonomously, maybe we're not really thinking and contemplating, maybe we're not praying, maybe we're not digging into our Bibles and questioning whether or not we are really doing all that we can do in these areas. That is, the areas of being conformed to the world and the area of visiting the fatherless, visiting the widows, visiting those in need, and then also the area of being a parent. Here specifically, Ephesians 6 and verse 4, being a father. So let us not be conformed to this world, but let us be transformed and let us live not autonomously in regards to just being on autopilot spiritually, but let us live aspirationally, seeking to go to heaven and please our Father. If you're here tonight and you need to come forward, you need prayers of the congregation, you need to be restored, we're here for you. We want to assist you in any way that we can. Maybe you're here tonight and you're not yet a child of God, and you want to make the decision to become one and be baptized into Christ for the remission of your sins based upon your belief and confession in Him. won't you obey the gospel? Won't you obey the Bible, which commands that very thing, as we see in Acts chapter 2, in Mark chapter 16, and verse 16. If you have any spiritual need, please come forward as all together we stand and sing.